This is the Depth Mystic Community Podcast, episode 36. Featuring Jungian Depth Mystic, Zach Tolan. Promotional Manager, Zach Tolan. And me, podcast host, Zach Tolan. So, Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan, what do you think we're going to talk about this week? Human creativity. Human creativity? How do you mean? It's part of our instinctive nature to want to be creative. Like every human way of life at one point needed to be invented by a person. That's what Aristotle was saying when he called human beings the rational animal. Is that for people, although they can repeat previously invented behaviors of those who have come before them, at least at one point, virtually everything human beings do in order to survive had to be conceived of by a human brain. We use tools, we use carefully thought out patterns of behavior in order to survive with those tools. And we organize ourselves and society according to thought out ideas rather than ordinary animal instincts. And so human creativity was, at one point, required in order to establish the patterns that we now copy. And then once they're copied, it's less creative. The copying of previously created ideas is much less creative, and it's what most people do most of the time in order to survive. But depending on the situation, you might need to tap into that original specifically human characteristic, which human beings, ever since the dawn of monotheism, have been projecting onto God himself as this characteristic of being able to create, as if from nothing, new ideas, new things, new ways of being. All of the monotheisms are obsessed with imagining the way in which the universe came into existence as having been the result of a creator. But in what context have we ever conceived of a creator? While we can watch some animals and some more primitive biological processes engage in what seems kind of like creation, the only real creators in the universe, other than the imagined God who created the universe, are in fact human beings who have a very special brain that has the ability to form concepts which allow it to take what exists and reframe it in the mind and then produce things that are completely new. Nature does this more or less by accident, using pre-established programs and random chance. Now, if you think God is kind of like a human being, then sure, God created the universe the way a human being would create a tool or build a house or a work of art. But that seems suspiciously like the human tendency to project its own subjective reality onto the universe itself. Human beings are the things that create in that profound sense that we think of as human creativity. Now, maybe God does too. Maybe God is also like a human being and has a mind and creates things with his own concept of what's good and what isn't. But that seems like a psychological projection for the most part. Okay, so what else have you got? How about we go back to the beginning? What do you mean? I mean, what's the core motivation for this podcast? Why don't you tell me? Well, we have a ministry. The ministry is the result of a mystical initiation. And we didn't know it to start with, but Carl Jung's life and psychology and philosophy turned out to be the central forerunner in terms of investigating the religious and spiritual territory that we stumbled into. Not that many people articulate Jung's worldview or express it or live it. Not that many people actually feel his religious impulse to the degree that they need to identify it. I mean, everybody feels religious impulses, and there's lots of different receiving vessels for it. Traditional religion being the standard one. You have some kind of spiritual impulse, and then you discover an existing religion. And it speaks to that spiritual impulse that you had. And so you don't need to further investigate. But some people's spiritual experiences are not received by the popular religions in a satisfying way. And that's why I ended up realizing that only Carl Jung's psychology was truly suited to receive my experience. And we can say that Jung was just a vessel himself, that the spiritual insight that Jung ended up devoting his life to is the same one that I devoted my life to. Anyway, my spiritual initiation period happened from spring of 1997 through October 2018. And I don't really know how to describe precisely what kind of altered mental state I was in during those 21 years. But one thing I am sure of is that it felt like a spiritual initiation. Very much like Luke Skywalker learning how to become a Jedi Knight. It was very similar to that. And there's parallels in shamanism, Japanese culture, Taoism. There are parallels. They're just not so abundant and widespread that I could in any way guarantee that I would be accompanied by a large number of people during my journey. Because the parallels that accurately conveyed this spiritual experience were not so well known to everybody as valid expressions of spiritual experience. Like Star Wars is well known to people, but how many people are accustomed to thinking of Star Wars in a truly religious sense? That it was a true metaphor for some genuine spiritual transformation. Many fewer than the total number of people who have experienced Star Wars. Okay. I appreciate you recapping the situation that we're in. The origin story, as it were. So, what else have you got? Yeah, I mean, the cross of Christ is pretty intense. So, for the last 5 episodes, we've been focusing on the main theme of Carl Jung, the Book of Job, the cross, and the blood of Jesus Christ as the answer to Job, or at least a preliminary answer. The discussion of the cross and Jesus is compelling and does continue to have energy. It's like people just need to believe that something like a person created the universe. Something with the mind of a person created the universe. And not only that, but is also extraordinarily benevolent. And moreover, that in order to prove that benevolence, he needed to turn into a person himself and then live a life, which is considered perfect, but who knows? We weren't there. I think by today's standards, we could probably come up with some criticisms. But few people are inclined to do that. Most people are just willing to allow that the life of Christ was perfect, or at least sufficiently perfect. And so anyway, the story is the God who created the universe needed to prove that he was good to people. And in order to do that, he became a person. And even that wasn't good enough. Merely becoming a person would not have been dramatic enough, or it wouldn't have brought the point home sufficiently. He also had to cause controversy in conditions where controversy could lead to death, and then get arrested, and then get crucified. And then to finish it all off, shortly after dying, resurrect himself, at least according to the people who were there. So obviously, whoever believed this story and made it popular was driven at least partly by a need to believe that an intelligence created the universe to begin with, instead of it was just kind of a natural thing, that the universe was just sort of a product of nature somehow, which is a more obvious conclusion. Like, I don't see any clear evidence of benevolent intelligence. Like, everything I see is what it is and seems to have come from the state before it. Now, maybe at some point, what is the original thing that all the stuff here came from was simply not possible, and that it required a human-like creator to assemble it to begin with. But even so, that doesn't need to prove itself in the way that Christians need their God to prove himself. So it's an additional layer on top of merely believing that some kind of intelligent mind created the universe. It's a layer that requires humans to examine themselves, both in terms of Jesus and in terms of all of the people around him who participated in making the life of Christ what it was. This is also essential reading for the belief system that we're talking about. Like, traditionally, the deist is the term for the person who thinks some kind of intelligent life force created the universe and set it in motion, but didn't do anything else. The Christian is the person who believes that the story of Jesus, combined with the behaviors of all of the people around him in that society at that time, was indispensable to a complete understanding of the nature of God. Yep, that does seem like an accurate description of the Christian religion. Jungian depth mystic Zach Tolan. And it does seem true that people do need to believe that there is some kind of all-powerful creator God that is like a person in terms of the initial creation. But the story of Jesus, as you point out, the idea is that things were so bad that a remedy needed to be put forward. Yeah, and the first remedy, traditionally, was the flood. People's behavior was so bad that God's first idea was to send a flood and erase everything, make it all go away. And it's only his second idea, maybe his third idea, But finally, he got the idea, instead of sending a flood, I'm going to actually become a person and live a life and draw a lot of attention to myself. So much so that the authorities don't know what to do with me. And then people are going to witness that. And then I'm going to resurrect myself, and people are going to witness that. And that will be enough for them. That will give them what they need. They will now have the grounds for the kind of happiness that they require. And of course, in their eyes, I will be happy too. So I won't need to send a flood anymore. My discontent with how things are will have been assuaged.
Yeah, I don't quite know what to make of it. But that does seem an accurate description of the Christian religion. And that'll do it for episode 36. Leave a comment in the discussion group, and I'll see you next week.